What are the masculinity stereotypes and how does it get in the way?
I definitely think in this Western culture and English society, just this stiff upper lip is just so pervasive. You know, what does it mean to be a man? It's somebody who's strong, stoic, doesn't cry, doesn't show emotions, succeeds alone. Like, that's very much something that I've been conscious of throughout my life.
It's interesting that even within that, straight away of what does it mean to be a healthy man, we jump straight into the, well, you don't do this. And we jump straight immediately into the negatives of, yeah, we don't show our emotions. That's essentially what having a stiff upper lip means, really. It's not like, oh, we're really proud and we're really reserved. It's don't show emotions. That's what it fundamentally means. And that sets men up for a loss from the very, very beginning in that case. It's impossible to be healthy if what it is to be a man is to be based on not being a human. Yeah. It's even such a complicated question that it almost doesn't make sense to even put it into words. So it then becomes, well, rather than focus on what it's not, let's consciously choose in a mature way what it is. And that's a decision which is going to be different according to every single man within his religion, within his race, within ethnicity, within class, potentially. That's going to have a big way in all this. So rather than looking for all the pressure on getting one answer, it then just becomes, okay, what does it mean for me to be a man? And then from there, then we can start to dig into the history of what it is to be masculine. Bearing in mind, men also need to be feminine at certain times. It's not, we are only masculine, that's all. We need to make room for what would traditionally be called like the feminine poles of all this as well.
You know, you mentioned about the masculine and feminine. You know, traditionally very strict fathers become very soft granddads. You know, so the modeling that we have as men to our dads can really impact of what it means to be a man. And I know for myself, my dad is happy to the same stories. Like, I guess from an Asian perspective, it's we need not show any shame. We need to fit in. We need to not stand out too much. We don't talk about emotions. We don't talk about the things that's not working. We only talk about the stuff that's working. Years ago, we did some theatre and we explored masculinity. I explored it from my heritage of Indonesia. One of the guys explored it from his heritage of Chinese and Vietnamese, and our fathers were very similar. So there was an exploration in terms of performative. If you succeed, then you're great. If you don't succeed, then you're not great. And as an adult, I've been aware of really carrying that to adulthood and how it showed up in my patterns of behavior, my values, and I need to perform, I need to overperform, I need to overachieve, then I'll be accepted as a man.
It's interesting comparing that as well in terms of what's expected of a man versus what's expected of a woman. Again, obviously, we're talking big whole-scale stereotypes as we're looking at this. It's just as a grip into the conversation. But if, let's say, there's a man and a woman decide to have a child, you'd very, very stereotypically across history, the man would be the one who disciplines the child. The woman would be the one who is able to compassionately care for the child. And that's sort of how it's told as a general loose story. And it just doesn't make sense on its own. Like, the idea of the man showing compassion is within the discipline, that is showing compassion. It's a very active style of doing it compared to a very passive style. But it's still nurturing in the same way that a woman can take a lot of authority in the home and actually encourage a lot of very, very healthy, nurturing habits in that child, in which case she becomes the educator, which historically has been left to the men. And it's just, we're at a stage where a lot of the old stories from previous generations now need to be called into question, and to see how much of the tradition is worthwhile and needs to be continued because it is healthy in and of itself, and how much of it needs to be sort of considered of its time. And although it was useful 100, 200 years ago, maybe doesn't directly apply right now. And I think we need to evolve our ideas, root them in history, root them in our family histories as well, but also understand that these are evolving processes. And that's I think a key part with all this. Try to understand that it's not static. Being a man isn't static. Being a good human isn't static. It is very much reliant on the context of the times. And when it comes down to the stereotypes of masculinity, they're only stereotypes when you look at what's going on around you. Yeah. So you need to look outside yourself first, see what's going on, and then make that conscious choice of what am I going to do about this? That's a key question that's underlying a lot of this.
Yeah, and I think that really feeds into as well. Like for me as a child, like male role models. You know, we're seeing it today with like figures like Andrew Tate. You know, young people gravitating towards them because they feel a lack of identity or connection with other men. You know, whether they've grown up in a single parent families and the only parent available to them is their mother, or if they have an absent father or a father who's abusive or distant or not engaging in some way, and therefore they're not able to co-regulate or have an example of what is a positive, healthy, articulate, in tune male, and how somebody else was to self-regulate if they've not got a blueprint to access. So therefore they grab onto whatever they can, kind of like self-educating with porn. In a similar way, you know, you go to somebody who looks successful, is articulate, has a lot of money, has cars, seems to be having everything that they need. Andrew Tate embodies a lot of that for young men. And then it's only through other stuff that we've seen in the media about that stuff that he's done and subjected other people to, then we're questioning why people are looking towards him. But it's like, why wouldn't they? When they've not got anybody else as a frame of reference in their life. You know, and again, I know that's for each of us here a main reason why we're getting into men's work, so we can actually co-regulate with other men, have these conversations, have conversations around what have we struggled with as men, what did we struggle with the role models that we had that were available to us or that weren't available to us, and how they modelled masculinity and vulnerability for us, and what it means to live a life of integrity.
There's something really insidious going on with all of this as well, which is never really talked about, but if, let's say, in this case of young men really looking up to Andrew Tate, in case what they're doing there is they're putting him on a pedestal. They're saying he's superior. And the implication of that is, well, that must mean I'm inferior. Or at the very least, I'm not that, so I'm steps down here. So how on earth can somebody who has very, very quickly put themselves into such a low state be proud of themselves? How can they be expected to think of themselves in a healthy, mature way if the very first thing we've done is we've not just looked at somebody to idolize, because having a mentor is a fantastic thing. That absolutely is vital, I would say, for a lot of young men. But it's the idea of, at what point have I projected a lot of qualities onto this man, which he might not even necessarily have, but our image of this man becomes something more. It's almost like godlike at that stage. And exactly, yeah. And it's just about realizing, like, through all these lenses, how much we've distorted it, and whatever I think that man is and whatever I think he represents, to flip that back onto me and then think, okay, well, what am I missing? Like, if I can see that in him and he embodies that, clearly some part of me wants some element of that. I've picked that characteristic in him over all the others. So what is it about that characteristic? If, let's say in this case it is dominance or authority or fame or whatever else it might be, it's starting to realize, okay, well, where is it in my life that I could start to seek more authority? It's not worshipping the image that somebody else is putting up online and putting them on a pedestal and making them unnecessarily superior, which is not just a burden on them, but it's a burden on ourselves to model or to try to follow that. Yeah. But it's then realizing, what do they represent? How do I see that in my life? And how do I take the first steps of then improving that in my life to see more of it? That's the healthier, or it's a much, much healthier way, rather than going down this route potentially towards resentment, bitter resentment especially, of, I can't believe this person has all this and I have nothing. It helps to steer away from that path. And I think a lot of young men today need to be reminded of that. Look, like, see who it is that actually has this emotional charge in you, and notice what that charge actually is. Notice what it's doing. Notice where your energy is going and not going at the same time, and then act on that.
You're talking about projections there, really. It's like, what qualities am I projecting in the other, in somebody who I idolized? You know, in the celebrity culture, there's an idolization of the other, of somebody who has something that I don't have. So then I need to have that for me to feel more of myself. I guess in some ways, it's really regrounding how do we reground? How do we re-clarify? You mentioned values, what's important to me right now, what stage of my life in right now, what's truly important within my life right now, so then I can move forward in the way I want to live, and then taking these as inspirations rather than the only destinations, the possible destinations. And and you mentioned Andrew Tate, there's almost like a polarization. We live in a polarized society. If something's sensational, then it's easy to really grab onto it. So we either really pull towards it, like grasping, or we really repelled against it. No, that's completely not me. And where is this space in the middle where we can be in that tension of okay, some of myself, I have a dominant aspect of myself, that I can be dominant in situations, in spaces, in moving forward. And also I can be soft and feminine in the way I can really truly feel my emotions, cry in front of other people. You know, I remember years ago when I play this role, or the mask, that the armor that I wear. I have to be this happy, lucky guy, you know, never show any emotions, always positive. Yes, I love to be happy, I love to be positive, but I'm not always fucking positive all the time. I can be sad, I can be down. But the old me wouldn't give myself permission, because I don't know what, like, would people still accept me or love me if that part of me emerged. And I remember, like, my friend called me and said, "You okay, bro?" Yeah, I'm okay. I said, "I don't think you're okay. I'm gonna come over." He came over to my flat. He brought a CBT therapist he was living with at the moment, at the time, and that was the first time in my life that I shared a part of me, a story of my life where I was vulnerable. I shared the parts of me, the stories of myself that I wasn't fully polished version of myself, which my ex-partner only knew. No one else in the world knew. I cried in front of him and her for the first time in my life to somebody I didn't know. And then after they left, it was the first time that I go, shit, okay. He still texts me afterward. Yeah, thank you for that, bro. Yeah, if anything else you need, let me know. And I was like, shit, he's still my friend after that. So maybe I can be more of myself. Maybe there's stereotypes, maybe this idea of who am I supposed to be based on my experiences might not be the only story that I can subscribe to.
Yeah. And I think that's it, isn't it? With stereotypes, they're so rigid and like what they represent and what they allow us to be. And like both of you have just said that, we're such multifaceted individuals and humans. There's so many aspects to us. Just like, you know, what emotions do we feel we have access to, like anger? You know, we've got joy, happiness, you know, regret, love, loss, you know, all these other emotions that we can express and feel into. And things with stereotypes as well, isn't it? We don't need to be just one thing. You know, we can be the masculine, the feminine, the dominant, the submissive, you know, the person who's always in control, the person that's got no control and no fucking clue what's going on. You know, it's okay to move through your life and experience different things at different times in your life because we're not rigid.
Yeah, and there's, I could be wrong here. I think it's the poet Robert Bly who came up with this idea. It's this wonderful little analogy to help summarize a lot of this. For anyone who might be listening to this and is a bit confused, imagine that when you're born, you've got this 360-degree personality. Like everything about you is amazing, because you know that because as a baby, everyone comes to see you and everyone is happy to see you. Everyone sees you, and before you've even done anything, just because you exist, people smile. People want to come over, they want to make little noises. Life is wonderful. You exist and life is better automatically. But then you start to grow up a little bit older, and then you start to be introduced into society, like polite company. You start to understand what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. So very, very quickly, this perfect 360-degree personality, which is everything is welcome, everything is okay, it starts to get skimmed away at a little bit. It quickly becomes like a 300-degree personality. I can show most of myself, but there's a little bit that gets hidden away. That little 60-degree wedge gets hidden away because that's not acceptable. And then as we start to get a little bit older, like mum and dad might be able to say, we like good people do this, good boys, good girls do this, but they don't do that. So again, it gets a little bit smaller. Then we start to get to school. We go through nursery, through primary school, through juniors, through secondary school, through sixth form. We get a job, and basically what's happening is each time that wedge is getting thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. And then when we get to this idea of being a man, we think we've understood it all. We think we know exactly who we are. We know where we're going. And this 360-degree personality might be 10 degrees at best. Let's just pick that as an example for the sake of this. So then what are the chances that as a 21-year-old man, you can solve all the problems that you're ever going to face with only 10 degrees of a personality? We're knowing that actually you're repressing or unaware of 350 degrees of who you are. You've got a rough idea of who you are as the tip of an iceberg, but there's so much more that you could be and that you've got access to, but it then becomes, as part of the process of becoming a healthy and mature masculine man, is digging away at what you've actually spent most of your life burying away. A big part of comes in a man's life where they have to then, instead of building up a persona like of what they want to be in the outside world, it's uncovering, to use Jungian terms, like the contents of the shadow. We need to start to bring in those parts of ourselves that aren't us, when actually they are us. We just don't see them fitting in with our self-image. Yeah. So in that case there, imagine like what your life looks like if instead of having a 10-degree wedge of your personality, it's actually 15 degrees. It might seem like it's barely anything, but it's huge in comparison to where you were previously. You've still got an enormous way to go. You're never going to get to the 360-degree wedge again, but it doesn't mean you have to live your life at 10%, or even going thinner than that and 5, or thinner than 1. If we started to live a life where we had even just 45 degrees as a wedge, imagine how much more fulfilled we could be as men, because we've just got access to so much more, which was already us anyway. Yeah. We're just rediscovering what it is to be us. And if we can do that, and if we can model that healthily, then that sets an incredible example to other young men or other men who are struggling. And then if they do something which is equally incredible, that might unlock in us that next bit of a percentage. So there's a perfect feedback with it all. But we need to try to reclaim what it is that we have unknowingly started to bury away, and typically for good reason as well. So we need to treat ourselves compassionately, but we need to try to reclaim our wider wedge at the very least, rather than just thinking we're the thin wedge.
That's really where the spaces that we co-create really come into play, because if we in our lives don't have that modeling of a different wedge, that how men show up and exist and conversate and model in the world, then we will never see it. Yeah. So I guess the sense of really the diversity and the different walks of life that men come to our retreats is really the value in that. Is, I think one of the guys was saying, I will never have, if I walk down the streets, you mentioned it before, if I walk down the streets, I would never have a conversation with one of you, a couple of you guys. And then actually hearing your stories, hearing your struggles, hearing your successes, I realized that there's a lot more similarities than I give myself and the other guys credit for.